Hello and welcome to Scale Stuff. In this week's video, I'm going to be building and reviewing the 1/72 scale Airfix Vintage Classics Bofors 40mm AA gun and Morris tractor. Daft as it sounds, I'm really looking forward to making this kit. I've been after making a Bofors AA gun for in the cabinet for ages, mainly to defend the ever-growing armoured column in there from a potential aerial attack. And the Morris tractor, well, I just think it has a nice look to it. Old trucks seem to have tons of character. In the box, you get a full colour instructions guide and paint plan, the parts to build the gun and tractor, shocking I know, and a small sheet of decals. A first quick look at the sprues shows, well, not much. It's the standard vintage classic sprue set. The flash on this sprue set is not too bad compared to some I've seen. In fact, it's looking pretty sharp. The ejection ports on a lot of the parts will be the main cleanup for this kit, but nothing major is jumping out at me. This kit is a re-release of a tooling first made in 1976, so it's not going to have the standard of detail of a modern kit. Anyway, onto the build. It's quite a fiddly first step in this kit. Lots of fine bits to make the rear suspension and drive. Thankfully, despite their fine appearance, this was a lot less painful to make than I thought it would be at first glance, but it will need to be left to dry for a while so it's safe to handle. Building the front suspension was much the same as the first step. Now it's on to making the chassis of the tractor. All the parts are going on really well. This kit is one of the later vintage classic models, so maybe this is playing a part in the kit's construction, as I just wish the Scammell's chassis went together like this. This is what the chassis is looking like so far. Next it's onto the cab. This is all going together really well. I just hope with the cab I'm not building myself into a corner, as I want to add the figure later on, but I'm not sure if he'll fit in with the way the cab's built up like this. Now carrying on with the cab build, first I'm adding the rear cab wall. And then the bonnet or hood for the Americans watching. Again, everything's going on really well. It's turning into a very relaxing build. The trickiest bit of this step was adding the lights and starting crank. With all these bits on though, I'm going to spray the cab up with some Humbrol 155 olive drab just to get some paint into this area before I add the roof. While this is drying, I'm going to carry on with the build, building the base of the tractor's rear bed. Now that the main cab's dry, I'm adding the rear bed to the tractor. With that on, it's time to add more bits here for the sides and what will be the ammo boxes once it's all together. Here I'm also adding the cab's roof, as I'd completely forgotten about this bit. Next, it's time to add the ammo crates to the rear bed. I'm actually pretty surprised as to how much of the rear bed has been filled with these. There's virtually no space that's not took up with ammo containers. Next, it's on to finishing off the cab area. The cab builds really nicely. To be honest, for an older kit, I'm impressed with how well it's going together. Adding the front bars and number plate though is a little tricky. Finally, it's on to adding some rear stowage to the back of the truck and the front fenders. If I'm honest, these bits were a little fiddly, but I'm clutching at straws saying that. With them on, that completes the build stage of this tractor. The wheels I'm leaving off for now, so they're easier to paint later on. Now it's onto the Bofors gun. First, building the side base supports. Then it's on to building the bulk of the main base. There are lots of bits to add here, and I'm going to need to add them fast. I'm ignoring the instructions on how to place the wheel axles as I'm building my Bofors wheels on, legs deployed, and the instructions don't cover that. It's easy to do though, just put the axles on upside down. Adding the bits is easy, but they are fine. I'm trying to work fast as I want to try and dry fit this thing on a flat surface to make sure everything's flat and level and not wobbly. With the base bit done and the wheels on, I'm going to leave this bit to dry for a good while as it's really delicate. This is how it's looking after a bit of drying time. I found leaving a paint pot where the gun goes helped weigh the parts down flat while it dried. Then it's on to building the gun base. This was a little bit fiddly to get together. The parts are very small. With the base done, it's on to adding the gun. The main part of this goes together well, but adding the gun sight requires a little double checking to make sure it's on and lined up properly. The final details on the gun go on okay. It will pay to dry fit the figures as you add the seats and handles, just to make sure everything is in the right place. A last little bit to watch out for if you're adding the gun screen is to remove the ejection pin marks from the front of this, as I'm not sure that the real gun shield was injection moulded. Those bits on though, that completes the model. Before I move on to painting, I'm making a base for this model from the plastic lid of a jar of peanut butter. I don't normally base my models, but with this one it will be much better to mount it on a base rather than have it all the separate parts rolling around the cabinet every time I dust in there. Anyway, now it's on to the painting. Before I get the brushes out, I'm giving the gun and tractor a quick spray base coat of Humbrol 155 Olive Drab. As always, I'm doing this off screen and outside to avoid fumigating myself. Base coat down, first I'm going to paint the black bits of the model. Most of this is just painting wheels. I'm also painting the barrel of the boffer in black as well though. The wheels on the boffer are very tricky to paint. I wish I could have left these off, but the way I wanted this AA gun configured didn't leave me with much choice. Next I move on to painting the canvas on the tractor. For this I'm using Tamiya XF49 khaki, getting a coat of this on the roof and side doors. While I've got this out, I also paint the seats on the boffer in this colour. I don't think in hindsight that the boffer had padded seats, but I bet if they could have had them, they would have had them. Now what I'm going to do is add the wheels to the tractor. This is how the model's looking with the wheels on. Wheels on, it's time to get a wash down on this model. For this I'm using watered down Vallejo matte black. The tractor takes a wash really well. While I was painting it though, I noticed that the rear doors are also canvas, so I'm going to have to repaint this area. Painting the boffer is a little tricky, as there are so many nooks and crannies on this delicate little gun to get into. With the wash dry, it's time to add the decals. Sadly, the decals in this kit are a bit rubbish. Like with a few of these newer vintage classic kits, the decals in this kit are a bit shiny and have tons of carrier film on them. I'm not sure who proof tested the decals for this kit, as most of them are a little big. The roof roundel is so big it actually won't fit on the roof properly at all. Fortunately, I've got a spare I can cut down, but doing this isn't ideal. Sort your act out. This is how the tractor's looking with the decals on. Next up, it's time to do the model's first dust coat. For a change in this video, I thought I'd use Army Painter Skeleton Bone for the first dry brush on this model. Over most of the tractor, I want to get this layer on as light as possible, just to highlight a few of the edges, but when it comes to the canvas roof, I want to go quite heavy with this, as canvas always seems to look dusty and grimy. I also want to fade the rooftop decal down as well, as I think as it is, it's a little bright. Adding the dry brushing coat to the buffers was tricky though, but a subtle hit is really bringing the model to life. This is what the tractor is looking like with the dust coat down. Now, before I paint a few details, I'm going around the tractor and boffer with some watered down black as panel line, just to paint in a few of the finer lines that the first wash missed. Next, it's on to painting the mud coat. For this I'm using BS Dark Earth, just getting it into all the fenders and around the wheels to make the tractor look like it's seen some life. On the boffers I do this mud coat on the gun deck where people would walk around, and on the lower frame where rain would splatter mud upwards. The boffer at this point is pretty much done, so I'm gluing it down to the base I made for it. The base, as shown earlier, is just the lid of a peanut butter jar cut off, painted green with a layer of wood chip flock. I have static grass, but feel at this small scale it would look a little long for this model. Finally now, it's time to get some of the details on the tractor done. First, I paint the headlights on the tractor with some Army Painter plate mail, as it's brighter than gunmetal and works well for lights. Then, using some Vallejo light grey, I highlight the lights with a little drop in the right hand corners and paint the number plate letters on the front of the cab. While I've got this paint out, I also put a W, O and a P on the flimsy cans on the back of the truck. I get the feeling that this stands for water, oil and petrol, but I'm not sure. Next, using some Army Painter Pure Red, I add a patch to the soldiers of all the little guys. It's not winning any awards, but it's a welcome bit of detail for them, I feel. And yeah, I forgot to add them earlier. Lastly, using AK World War I British khaki base, I paint the exhaust on the tractor. Anyway, with those little details on, I think I'm going to call this model done. This is the finished model. I'm very happy with how this model has come out, and I now feel safer knowing that the armoured column in the cabinet is defended from aerial attacks. In conclusion, the Airfix Vintage Classics 176 scale Bofors 40mm gun and tractor is a nice model kit. Being one of the older of the Classics line, this kit goes together very well with less flash and cleanup than some of the other kits in this line. The Bofors was a little bit of a fiddle at parts to make due to the thin small bits involved in making an AA gun in such a small scale, but overall I found the build of this model very enjoyable. Like with a lot of the new Vintage Classics lines of models, I feel that the decals in this kit let it down a bit. The RAF rounder was too big for the roof, and most of the rest of the decals have so much carrier film on them that they won't fit on without a trim. Now, trimming decals down is not exactly a tricky thing to do, but I feel this might frustrate a newer modeller who might have done everything right up to this stage to then have the decals not fit on or fall off. Because of this and the Bofors gun, I think that this kit is best suited to someone who already has a few kits under their belt, but by no means is this an advanced model. This kit cost me £10 direct from Airfix brand new, and for the time it's took me to make it, I think this model is worth every penny for the price, as it's easily took me 2 casual weekends of building to make this kit. Anyway, that's my build and review of the Airfix Vintage Classics Bofors 40mm gun and Morris tractor. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and it gave you a good idea of what to expect from this model kit. Until next time though, look after yourselves and have a good one. Goodbye.